Sounds good. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this press conference. My name is Owen Duckworth. I'm the Director of Organizing and Policy at the Alliance. I'm also one of the folks who staffs the Equity in Place Coalition. Those folks you'll see today on the call are all members of our Equity in Place Coalition, which is a diverse group of partners from organizations led by people of color around the region, as well as housing advocacy organizations working to advance housing justice and equitable community development. We really do our organizing and advocacy work, leading with a race equity lens, and really trying to center and shift the power inequities in our regions and society that shape inequitable outcomes in our communities. So we know that households of color have been disproportionately impacted by the COVID pandemic. For instance, over the course of the pandemic, 50% of Black workers, 60% of Indigenous workers in Minnesota have filed for unemployment. As of mid-April this year, 25% of Black, Indigenous, and people of color renter households in Minnesota reported being behind on rent, compared to just 9% of white renter households. So we see some of these inequities in terms of who's able to make rent under the pandemic as well. And we are here today to talk about, of course, the statewide eviction moratorium and the proposed off-ramp at the state legislature. We see firsthand the way the eviction moratorium has really worked to save lives, save people's lives in this pandemic in a uniquely challenging moment, and really proven to us as folks who work on these issues that our state is stronger when everyone is housed. Before the end of this legislative session, we know our policymakers face an urgent and critical choice to step back from the eviction moratorium with intentionality and sustain housing stability of renters in this moment, or potentially do things in a not as positive way and fling open the doors of mass displacement and eviction that will lead to negative impacts for thousands of households, both in the short term and for many years to come. So as the legislature negotiates the end of this eviction moratorium, we really here to sort of say no. We want to say no evictions. We demand that the eviction moratorium prioritizes racial equity and prioritizes housing stability. And more specifically, we believe the eviction moratorium off-ramp needs to include protections. So no evictions for non-payment of rent should be allowed for a period of 12 months at the end of the eviction moratorium until COVID emergency rental assistance, which is coming from the federal government to the state of Minnesota in a large amount of money, needs to have time to be fully distributed. We believe landlords should be required to provide 60-day written notice prior to filing an eviction action. And we believe the state must expunge falsely filed eviction writs, which occurred during the moratorium period as well, so folks don't have that stuck on their permanent records. We're going to hear from a number of tenant stories, a number of folks who are on the ground or experiencing issues around this. We believe that really the experience and expertise of renters must be centered in any conversations about housing stability and housing policy. And we believe also renters' experiences during the pandemic have not been properly told and not been told enough in the context of policy decision-making process around the eviction moratorium and the off-ramp. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Ariana with the Inquilinos Unidos, and we will go from there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Owen. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Ariana Feldman. I'm with Inquilinos Unidos por Justicia, or United Renters for Justice. We are a renters' rights organization, base building organization based in South and North Minneapolis. We have a little over 300 active members, and over the past year, organizing with folks, we have seen the devastating impact on communities of color in our city that the COVID-19 crisis has sparked. And now so many of our members are worried and at risk of eviction, even even as things start to reopen or jobs start over. There are many folks who are still struggling with back rents, with back charges on utility payments. And so we are here today to call for immediate action to halt the evictions that could be happening if there's no action taken, and if the eviction moratorium is to end too soon. and generally to call for an end to displacement in Minneapolis. So with that in mind, I'm going to pass it to Ariana Anderson, who is a renter leader on the North Side, and she's going to share a little bit about her experience with the eviction moratorium and the COVID-19 pandemic.
Good morning. I am Ariana Anderson. I go by the pronoun she, her. I've been a Haverbrook resident since 2014, and before the pandemic, my experience with Haverbrooks has been that they're very neglectful as in fixing things and taking care of things, as far as regular maintenance. And during the pandemic, that didn't slow down. They were quick to give us eviction notices if we couldn't pay our rent, if we were past those 5 days, if we were late a little bit. And they just really, to me, they don't care about the community. They come to Minneapolis, they buy up all these homes, they don't give back, they don't give jobs. And when our backs are against the wall during this pandemic, they threaten, they can't wait to put us out. They threaten to put us out. They put the sign on our door for our neighbors to see. And quite frankly, we can't afford for anybody else to be, for the homeless rate is, we can't afford for it to go up any more than it already is. It's a crisis. It's tragic. I mean, just look around the city. You see tent cities popping up here and there. This is Minnesota. You've never seen that before. And yet and still, Haverbrooks is continuously buying homes and continuously raising the rent, putting in hidden fees, and they just don't care. It's all about money, and it's tragic. And as a Minneapolis resident, right now I'm trying to move, there's nothing out there. So you feel trapped, you feel stuck, and you feel neglected and unheard. So it's not a good time to start evicting residents.
Thank you, Ariana. Yeah, and just wanted to briefly add that Ariana's experience really points to how important it is that elected officials take immediate action, because big companies like Havenbrook Homes continue to exploit and extract from our communities. So with that in mind, I'm going to pass it over to Ivory with Homeline.
Thanks, Ariana. Hello, thank you for joining us today. My name is Ivory Taylor. I'm the Organizing and Capacity Building Director with Homeline. Homeline is a statewide nonprofit organization that runs a free and confidential tenant hotline. We advise an average of 1,000 households per month. We also work on the ground with tenants, organizing around displacement, poor conditions, and mismanagement. During the pandemic, we've advised over 6,000 households in the past 14 months about issues directly related to the pandemic. Close to 50% of those calls were about housing instability concerns, such as threatened evictions or lease terminations. We also hear concerns about privacy, repairs, lease and rule changes, rent increases, late fees, fair and easy access to financial assistance, and much more. We've witnessed our clients experience efforts where landlords aim to circumvent Minnesota's current eviction suspension. They shut off utilities, they changed locks, they repeatedly towed cars, they resorted to public shaming, and they instituted retaliatory rent increases. These issues are particularly concerning to us, and they could increase dramatically with a weekend off-ramp. Additionally, there are thousands of evictions bottled up. So there were 1,246 evictions filed in the first 12 months of the suspension, which is about 8% of a normal year. Usually there are around 16,000 filed. With the lifting of the federal or state moratorium, as many as 53,000 Minnesota households are at immediate risk of eviction. And we know that this disproportionately impacts Black and Brown Minnesotans. Any off-ramp must be thoughtfully created to ensure that equity in housing is centered, and keeping families housed has to be the priority. I would like to pass to Mark with Urban Homeworks at this time. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mark Jensen. I'm with Urban Homeworks. I'm the manager of equity and engagement. We have over 130 properties in North and South Minneapolis and a handful in St. Paul. As a landlord, we've worked with a lot of other landlords in our community. We know there are good landlords, and we know that there are, and we see the results of abusive landlords. and there are many who use eviction as a part of their business plan. These landlords see eviction as a tool to get a few extra months of rent every year. However, we see our residents as a community partner. We believe housing stability is essential for healthy, equitable community for everyone. We do not see our residents as a capital investment to be manipulated for maximum profits. Yes, we do have tenants who have problems. We do have tenants that cause problems for their neighbors. We do have tenants that need to be asked eventually to leave at times. When all else fails and a tenant is dangerous or destructive, we first work to have a voluntary move with even cash for keys. We have not needed to evict at all during this moratorium time. Our practice is to connect with our residents to help them remove barriers to the success, to connect them to resources. We work to help them secure rent assistance as well as support from food to mental health. Now, I know not every landlord has staff for such services, but as long as there are resources available for rent payment, no one should be evicted for non-payment. We must work together for community stability and equity for all Minnesota residents. This time I'm going to pass it to Melyoun, who is at Hope Community Center, and they also work with tenants and do amazing services there. Melyoun?
Yep. Hi, my name is Melyoun. I work for Hope Community. I'm the community ownership project coordinator. Hope Community represents both landlords and tenants. Our community ownership program helps tenants become homeowners and landlords, including working with current renters who want to buy the buildings they live in. Landlords need to be paid. It takes money to keep a property maintained in a good shape for residents. So we need to make sure that this public investment gets used to support residents in quality and affordable housing. Evictions are bad for both tenants and the community. And it will be damaging for our residents who are aspiring to become owners. Now it's time to make sure that people are stable as we come out of this pandemic. We need off-ramp policies that support tenants and landlords. As a nonprofit developer, we think that there should be more public funding to support tenants and landlords during this process. And with that, I will pass it to Fatuma with ACER.
Hi, my name is Fatuma Mohammed. I'm the housing organizer at ACER, African Career Education and Resource. Through this pandemic, we have been assisting tenants get connected with rental assistance. One of the things we have witnessed is the pace of rental assistance being much, much slower than the pace of evictions, where tenants feel that they need to borrow or put themselves in difficulty to not be either informally or formally evicted, instead of just waiting for that rental assistance that they desperately need and deserve. Today, I want to introduce you guys to Suad. Suad is a tenant that we've worked with who has been protected by the eviction moratorium because she was on a long-term, like 12-month lease. When her lease ended, her landlord put her on a month-to-month lease and increased her rent by $200. Suad, welcome.
magacaygu waa Sucaad. Waxaan ahay dadkii oo mataqaana iyagana dhibaatadan ku dhacday oo la dhahay guriga ka guud oo landlordkayga anigana idhahay mataqaana bil baad haysataa waa inaad ka guurtaa. marka qolada bangladeshinka ay caawiyeen oo mataqaana maadaama oo aan la guuri karin hadda oo mataqaana xilli xun lagu jiro layna dhahay khasabka guur waa ina iga guurtaa hal bilaana laysiiyey inaad ku guuro. marka kulli dhibaato badan aan kala kulannay marka waxa waaye mataqaana aad baan ugu mataqaanaa in oo dadka la caawiyo oo mataqaana aan la dhihin ka baxa guryahooda aad bay u fiican tahay arrintaas. Hadalkeeda ay kala dhawaan.
If I could briefly just translate, she said she experienced she experienced difficulty with her landlord, and she would really encourage that the eviction moratorium maintain its defense of tenants, because it has helped her a lot. Thank you. I'd like to pass it on to Aaron.
Marka mahadi karaa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Aaron Burke. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a community organizer at Jewish Community Action. JCA is a community-based organization. We organize the Jewish community around racial and economic justice issues. I particularly organize our housing justice campaign, and I'm an Equity in Place coalition member. I'm going to go over a couple things that Owen covered at the top. One being that we are here today really around the decision that the legislature and the governor's administration is coming to as they negotiate the end to the peacetime emergency and the eviction moratorium in particular. As Equity in Place, we are uniting to say no evictions. So the three things that we want to see as sort of the bedrock to an agreement is no evictions for non-payment of rent should be allowed, period, for a 12-month period at the end of the eviction moratorium until the COVID emergency rental assistance resources are fully distributed. We know we have over $500 million in rental assistance coming into the state, and no non-payment evictions should happen until all of that money gets distributed. We believe that landlords should provide a 60-day written notice prior to filing an eviction action. Currently, Minnesota has one of the fastest eviction timelines in the country, and a 60-day written notice prior to an eviction being filed would dramatically increase the amount of time that we're able to get assistance to renters. And lastly, the state must expunge falsely filed eviction writs, which occurred during the eviction moratorium period. To learn more, we have put together an outline specific recommendations for the off-ramp. We're going to share that both in the chat and the Facebook feed at the moment. And we're also urging you to contact your state lawmakers by using our online action form. We're also putting that in the chat and Facebook feed right now. So you're able to send your lawmakers a personalized letter asking for these three demands. So now for questions, I'm going to pass it back to Owen. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks to everyone who spoke, both from our Equity in Place partners and from folks willing and able to share their personal experience in this time as well. We'd like to open it up to questions from members of the media now, but kind of right before we do, to get us started, wanted to sort of pose one question that we've heard pretty consistently, which is why we should be concerned about an eviction moratorium off-ramp if there are millions of dollars available in rental assistance. And I'm going to pass to Margaret Kaplan from Housing Justice Center to have her sort of help answer this question, and then we'll invite others to pose additional questions. Margaret.
And that's really an excellent question. Right now, there are $671 million that have been allocated to the state of Minnesota for emergency rental assistance through the last two Recovery Act bills. And so we really feel like in order to be successful, we need to give that money time to get to the people who need it. The Emergency Rental Assistance Program, Rent Help MN, could be absolutely transformational in terms of allowing people to have safe and stable housing coming out of the COVID crisis. But it only opened 3 weeks ago. And it is going to take time for that money to get into the hands of renters. It is going to take time for that money to get into the hands of landlords. We have to wait till that money gets out the door. Because otherwise it's not going to fulfill its promise of keeping people stably housed. We're very impatient, I will say, with the speed with which that's going out the door, but everybody is working really hard to try and make that happen. Right now, because it's only been open for about 3 weeks, there are thousands of people who are eligible for emergency rental assistance who don't even know the program exists yet. And the difference between somebody staying in their home and being evicted shouldn't be the bureaucratic process of that money getting into the hands of the people who need it most. So let's give the process time to do what it needs to do. And we all need to be just a little bit more patient if we want people to stay in their homes.
Thank you, Margaret. I see Bill Warner as having a question here. Bill?
Yeah, thank you. And a couple of your speakers touched on it. Mr. Burke did, and I believe Mr. Duckworth as well. I just want to clarify what you're asking. And let me tell you what my understanding is, and tell me if I'm correct. Eviction moratorium ends. You want to have no evictions for a period of 12 months, or until all the federal money is distributed. Is it whichever is later? Give us an idea of that, if you would, for clarification. And then secondly, the House proposal versus the Senate in negotiations on this, which one do you like better? Give us an idea of who you're rooting for at the legislature as we get into the opening, as we get into the final days here. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Bill. I can maybe start fielding some of this, and Aaron, Margaret, others, please jump in where I might miss some things. I'll start with sort of the question between the House and Senate bill. I think we would certainly err towards the House bill in terms of even to this piece, the first part of the question around the sort of 12-month post end of eviction moratorium. I mean, for us, that's the time period. That's sort of the time period that's mentioned in the House File 12 in the House bill that we think is the closest to the timeline that we believe is appropriate to allow for resources to roll out. So that may still not be an ideal amount of time to get all the resources given the amount of them that are coming from the federal government, but certainly out of what's being proposed at the legislature right now, that's the timeline that we're much more comfortable with. And the Senate bill has a protection for folks who are in the application pipeline for a 12-month period, which is okay. But we understand that the amount of time that it's going to take just for people to become aware of the amount of rental assistance. We know from the first round of the process last year how long that can take for resources to get to folks. And given the fact that it's an even larger chunk of money that's coming out this time, we really believe there has to be patience and allow for those resources to get into community, into the hands of tenants and ultimately landlords as well.
Just so that I'm clear, the 12-month period that you're talking about, then no evictions, or if all the money is distributed before the 12 months, then are evictions allowed to resume? That's my question. For what you're advocating, I'm talking about now, not the House bill specifically, what your groups are advocating.
Sure. Well, I mean, what we're really saying is no evictions for non-payment of rent, right? I mean, that's really what we're pushing for. We could get into it's a longer potential policy conversation about some of the different language that's being floated about around sort of material breach of lease in the House and Senate bills. So that's sort of a longer conversation. I'm happy to maybe field that one offline or amongst a few of the policy folks. But in short, yes, what we're advocating for is really sort of saying, as long as there's in excess of $500 million for specifically designated from the federal government to help people pay rent, there's no reason that we should be evicting people for non-payment of rent. So
okay, so 12 months regardless is what you're saying, that we don't have any evictions for non-payment of rent. after the moratorium off ramp begins?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, I just want to be sure I'm understanding correctly. Thank you.
For sure. Thank you. Other questions?
Hi, this is Jesse with the Star Tribune. I was wondering if there's more you believe the state should be doing to make people aware of the rental help, and whether you've gotten any indication of when the state will start giving out those dollars, when you can anticipate those being received.
I can take this one. This is Margaret from Housing Justice Center, and please, for others who are involved in this, fill in. So one of the things I will say is that the state has started to really push to try and promote Rent Help MN. You know, they started with a very soft launch, I think, because they didn't want the system to be overloaded. And now they've been trying to get the word out. They've been working with organizations around the state who are field partners, who have connections to communities. I'll say that a lot of our focus has been on people who are who don't have good internet access and are historically kind of disconnected from information. They're working with some marketing firms. They're working with culturally specific organizations to really get that word out. In terms of how fast the money is going to go out the door, we're not yet certain. As of yesterday, remember, the program has only been open for about 3 weeks, and they hadn't yet issued any checks, but we're expecting an update later this week from Minnesota Housing about, you know, whether they've approved some payments and how quickly those are going out the door. I know that the hope is that the payment process can be much faster than it was last time around, and they're really trying hard to do that. On the other hand, we want to make sure that somebody's housing stability isn't dependent on any kind of bureaucratic system trying really hard and not being successful pushing money out the door quickly. We had some applicants, for example, in the last round of funding, the CHAP program, who were applying in early December, right before the program closed, and it took over 3 months for the money to reach their landlords. So once again, we hope the money moves faster. We think that is really important. We know people are trying to do that, but also that shouldn't be the deciding factor in whether somebody is stable in their housing or not.
Mark, I see your hand up. I don't know if you also wanted to reply to the question.
I would just say too, as a landlord at Urban Homeworks and to other landlords, the process of helping your residents fill out this paperwork, which is fairly complex, is actually much simpler than evicting them. And so when we come down to non-payment, the landlord should take some responsibility in helping do this with the web access they may have, with language resources they may have, and it would actually be a simpler process for them than going through an eviction process. So it's something the landlords can definitely and should be participating in to get payment as long as that money is available.
And Fadumo as well.
Sure. I really want to highlight how transformational this program can be. Recently, I helped a tenant in the Brooklyn Park Booking Center apply where her the amount that the assistance that she would receive at the end of the application, because it tells you the total was over $10,000, and she's just one case, right? And if you multiply that by the hundreds of people who live in the state of Minnesota, I mean the millions of people who live here, like it's kind of mind-boggling. And it's not like this is really fast, like this is amazing, and they are like happy to wait, but I believe that they should also receive the time to be protected from evictions.
Thank you, everyone. Any other questions from folks here? I'll just add as well, we're also hoping that the state, as part of an off-ramp, this is something that's less, maybe less policy, but more practice. We're hoping that the state can require also landlords just to provide a clear notice to tenants who are behind on rent, kind of what they owe and why, so that folks can really understand what the amount that they need to apply for and secure for rental assistance. So that's something that's kind of more administrative, but just something that would be practical and helpful, especially even to organizations here who are assisting people in applying as well, just to have that type of information be readily available. So I'm checking the chat. If there are no further questions, we can certainly wrap up. Appreciate everyone's time, folks who joined the call, folks who presented, and thank you all. And we will be continuing to be in touch with legislators and the governor's office, and pushing for what we believe is a fair and equitable eviction moratorium off-ramp. And again, looking forward, we hope that some of the lessons we've learned and some of the things we've seen become possible under the COVID-19 pandemic, ways in which the government has responded to a really moment of crisis in our housing system and across many systems, can be something that we hope government, and we will continue to push government to respond to the needs of renters, communities of color, and other folks who've been impacted by this pandemic and impacted by a housing crisis. So thank you everyone for your time, and have a good day.